Hello and welcome. My name's Billy Watson, and my day job, I'm the Chief Executive of the Scottish Association for Mental Health, that's SAMH, and we're one of 6 members of Disability Agenda Scotland who are proud to host today's event. Great to see so many of you here. Can I just check everybody can hear me okay? I've got one of these little strange mics sticking out my ear, for those of you who can't see it. So if you can hear, that sounds like you can. I'm not seeing any dissent. So that's great. Thank you for coming along. We've got a really wide attendance from the constituency that Disability Agenda Scotland represents. And today is, and sorry, I should have also said that I chaired Disability Agenda Scotland Executive Group on behalf of the directors and the chief executives of all 6 charities. So that's why it's me today, but we're here representing the whole voice of our constituency. Today is our opportunity. Often the voice of disabled people is at the margins of debate, and their issues struggle to be heard inside the clutter of voice and noise that surrounds Scottish parliamentary elections. So today is our day to put the issues that affect disabled people right at the core of the political agenda. We have representatives from all the main parties who will be contesting this election. Let's use the hour and 20 minutes that we're going to have together with our candidates here to make sure we explore the things that matter to us. We'll do that through some set questions. Some people who couldn't be here today and some people who have already submitted 1 or 2 written questions. So I'll do my best just to try and play those in and get responses from the panel to those. But also very much we want to hear your burning questions from inside the room today. Disability Agenda Scotland, as I said, is a consortium of 6 leading charities across Scotland and across the disability spectrum. So whether that's physical disability, learning disability, sensory impairment, communication support needs or mental health, and we represent the voice of tens of thousands of people. And it's important that we get a platform in this election. Daily, we will be in touch with tens of thousands of people across those 6 organisations, hearing concerns, trying to provide support. But sitting behind that is around 1 million people in Scotland who are disabled or are living with a long-term health condition that makes this a vital constituency for all of our politicians. These votes really matter. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure we cover the ground appropriately. During January of 2016, Disability Agenda Scotland ran a whole series of focus groups across Scotland, speaking to all disabled groups in a set format. And then we pulled together what the big issues of concern were for those groups across Scotland. So DAS has produced an election pledge which summarises many of the agendas and issues that were really important to all of our constituencies. But in particular, there were 3 areas that stood out for you, and we want to try and cover these today, but not exclusively. So if a question you've got is not under one of the following 3 headings, feel free to please still bring it into the room today. But when we asked all of you a few months ago what was really important, 3 things came out really strongly. First was employment and employability. The second was welfare and social security. And the third was the stigma and discrimination that surrounds disability issues. So the DAS group have got together and we've put together an election pledge that we've been asking candidates and politicians existing and prospective to sign up to. And I'll just very quickly read what those 3 headline pledges that we're looking for support on are. Under employment, it's support necessary action and the opportunity provided by enhanced devolution to reshape and improve the way employment services work in Scotland. The second call is on social security, and it's to seize the opportunity presented by the devolution of parts of the social security system to design and deliver a system that empowers disabled people and recognises everyone's contribution and value to society. And the third issue that we're asking the politicians to pay particular attention to is stigma and discrimination. The call there is to support our call for the new Scottish Government to fund a national campaign to raise awareness of disability and reduce stigma across the agenda. So those are the three big issues that came out from the focus group work that we did. But as I've said, we'll be happy to hear on any topic today, but I'll try and steer some of that around those three themes. And today's not an event. It is an event. Of course it's an event. Let's make it a good event and an enjoyable event and have a great discussion. But it has to be part of a process of how disabled people across Scotland can influence politics and influence governments of the day. This is the third hustings in as many years that DAS have run, and I think these are important events, and they're continuing to be seen as important events by candidates to make sure that we just don't do this every so often. We're there, we won't go away, and we have issues, and we'll keep returning to them. But we're also trying to work across the parties, and that's why we've got a whole selection of candidates today so that we can hear from them about what their party is going to do post-election for disabled people in Scotland. And lastly, by way of introduction, there are a whole series of issues around inequalities for people that are disabled, and that's why this is not an event. This is important, and it matters on an ongoing basis. Disabled people are much more likely to live in poverty than the population at large. In the most deprived areas in Scotland, you're twice as likely to have a disability as you are in the least deprived. In households in Scotland where a disabled person lives, 49% of those households have a net income of below £15,000 a year. Unemployment rates for disabled groups are on average at over 50%, and 78% of disabled people in the last 2 years through survey have said that the assessment process disabled people are going through under welfare reform is making them more ill as they go through that process. These are huge issues. They're huge issues of equality, and hopefully we can explore some of them today. So the introductions are just about done. I want to just quickly take you through one or two aspects of housekeeping, just so we're all safe and we know what's going to happen over the next hour and 12 minutes. I'm looking at a clock at the back. That's how precise I can be. And the first is we're trying to make this as an accessible event as possible. So hopefully everything that you need to be able to participate in the event is already happening for you or can happen as you seek to engage with that. If not, please let us know. There are plenty of people from the organisations in the room who help you make your question or engage with the event the way you want to. There's no fire alarm, which is predicted or being tested this afternoon. So if we do hear a fire alarm, we need to leave this room from the door you entered and make our way to Middlesex Street, which is just at the side door. Sorry? That's great. I don't know if everybody heard that. So Milne Park Street and out through the gate. Out through the gate down to the entry where Milne Park Street, so we need to go out the back door. So it's great. Thank you very much for that. I know there are others in the room who will help us if the alarm goes off, but thank you very much. That was helpful. You're going to be really useful for us today. That's great. Thank you. We're also live streaming the event. There were a lot of people who wanted to be here today who are not able to be here. So it's actually going out. We're doing some filming from the back of the room. It is behind most of you, the camera. If anybody's really uncomfortable about that or doesn't want to appear on camera, again, just let us know. I know we'd been saying that to people as they came in. So if that is the case, you're maybe sitting to the side. But again, let us know if that makes you feel uncomfortable. We're also tweeting the event. No good hustings event these days can happen without social media. So please, I think we've got a Twitter wall somewhere in the room. No, we've not. But we will be tweeting. And again, we're trying to get the messages out there for the event. The event's going to last about an hour and 10 minutes from now. That will kick off with 3 minutes from each of our candidates, and we've got agreed order to do that. And I'll introduce the candidates in one go just before we hear from them. And then it's open to question and answer for the rest of our time. So I think we're all set. We've got a great panel. We've got lots to talk about. And I'm going to do the introduction starting on my right as I'm facing you. And we have Jamie Hepburn, who's representing the SNP, and most recently Minister for Sport, Health Improvement and Mental Health in the current Scottish Government. Jamie's the candidate for Cumbernauld and Kilsyth. Been an MSP since 2007, and politically before that through the University of Glasgow held positions such as the convener of the Federation of Student Nationalists. I wondered if that was right. Is it nationalist students or student nationalists? Right. The convener of the Federation of Student Nationalists and Young Scots for Independence. Jamie, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. On my immediate right is Michael Shanks, representing Scottish Labour. Michael works with a disability charity in Scotland, in Glasgow, that's dealing with some of the most vulnerable and troubled young people and their families, also leading another charity for young people with complex disabilities and life-limiting conditions. Michael's the candidate for Glasgow Kelvin. Delighted to have you here, thank you. To my immediate left is Councillor Robert Brown, CBE, representing the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Robert is the candidate for Rutherglen, and the list candidate, I believe, top of the list for the Liberal Democrats in Glasgow. Robert is a former MSP for the Glasgow region between 1999 and 2011, and has also been a consultant and partner in Glasgow firm of solicitors. And as part of his previous incarnation at the Scottish Parliament, Robert was the Deputy Minister for Education and Young People from 2005. And he's currently a councillor for the Rutherglen ward of Rutherglen South on South Lanarkshire Council. I think I got everything there.
Been about a bit.
Yes. So I couldn't say that, of course, but you're very welcome, Robert. Thank you for coming. To Robert's left is the candidate for the Scottish Conservatives, and that's Graham Brooks. Graham is the candidate for Greenock and Inverclyde. Another who works in the third sector is a project manager for a not-for-profit organisation, and also a former centre director for Inverclyde Youth for Christ. Graham, thank you very much for being here. You're very welcome. Last but not least, and rightly too pointing out to us before we started in terms of gender balance, and we're not particularly well balanced today, I'm afraid. However, representing the Scottish Greens, Sarah Kitson is the list candidate for Glasgow. Sarah is co-convener of the Glasgow branch of the Greens, and previously stood as a Green Party candidate in both council and UK parliamentary elections. Again, another who works in the third sector for LGBT Youth Scotland, and is on the executive of Women for Independence. And am I right in thinking, so you're second on the list for right. Greens in Glasgow next to Patrick Harvey. Sarah, thank you for being here, and you're very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the introductions. Could I ask you to show your appreciation for our panels? We're now going to hear 3 minutes from each of the candidates about what their party will do for disabled people in Scotland for the next term of the Scottish Parliament. Jamie, can I ask you to go first, please?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Billy, can I begin by thanking you for chairing today's event, and can I thank Disability Agenda Scotland for putting on today's Hustings event. I think Billy was quite right to make the point, of course, that this shouldn't be seen as a one-off event. It should be a process of ongoing engagement. In that regard, looking at the board over there, I think the particular member organisations of Disability Agenda Scotland can certainly say, I hope they feel they've been successful in having had an ongoing process of engagement with the current Scottish Government. I think I've met with all of the organisations at various occasions. I don't want to say too much at the outset, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully we've a bit more time for there to be the question and answer session. But in terms of what I wanted to say in regards to my opening remarks, the Scottish National Party's perspective, ambition for those with a disability in Scotland is that they should be able to lead as fulfilling an independent life as anyone else in Scotland. Our ambition for everyone in Scotland is that they should be able to achieve their full potential, and no one should be felt not to be able to be part of that process. Of course, there is a recognition that for some there may be some additional assistance required, and that ambition about aspiring to independence is set out in a number of our strategies that we've laid out as an administration. The autism strategy, for example, or the Keys to Life strategy, both have that as their hallmark. In trying to reach that ambition, I believe that there has been some progress made, be that through the introduction of measures such as self-directed support, which I think has been successful in many cases in enhancing a greater sense of choice and independence for many people in receipt of a package of support from a particular local authority, or through the creation of the Independent Living Fund here in Scotland, ensuring that those in receipt of ILF, some 3,000 people here in Scotland, can continue to receive such support, whilst in the rest of the UK, of course, no longer exists. Through our mental health strategy, we've seen an investment in the CME programme. Tremendous strides, much more to do still, but tremendous strides in tackling stigmatisation around the area of mental health through the passage of the Mental Health Act to enhance the rights of those who may have to interact with the mental health system. The legislating for a right for people to receive equipment for alternative and augmentative communication, literally empowering people to have a voice, to be able to communicate with the rest of the world, or through the passage of the Carers Act, which took place earlier this year. We know that there are some 800,000 unpaid carers, and many people rely on them for support, and I was very proud to take that act through Parliament. So much has been done, but I recognise much more still can be done in this coming parliamentary term. I think in particular two areas where we can achieve more are through the devolution of enhanced powers over the area of social security. And I always try and use that term, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, I always try and refer to it as social security rather than welfare, which I think has become a bit of a debunked term, and also the additional powers that we have over employability. I think much has been done over the past 5 years, but I recognise there's much more still to be done.
Thank you very much.
Some noise and activity going, which is fantastic, I think. This is something of a reunion as well for most of the panel, because a few weeks ago we did the National Autistic Society's Hustings, all of us, I think. So hopefully this is as useful as a discussion as I think that was. As kind of was said in my introduction, this is a kind of subject that's really close to my heart. Since I was 14, I've volunteered for a charity that works with young people with disabilities. Jordan promised he wouldn't heckle tonight, and I've led that charity for the past decade, and in that time, a lot of the issues that are facing disabled people in Scotland, sorry, Jordan, a lot of the issues haven't really moved on very much, and we're still struggling against some of these challenges. And the one I think that I see particularly, because we go up to age 25, is that kind of mythical word of transitions, which we use quite a lot and which doesn't mean very much actually. We expect when people turn 18, they kind of automatically transition into adulthood, and suddenly everything's fine and you don't need the same care and support that you got when you were under 18. And I think that's something we haven't quite tackled in Scotland yet, because the care needs don't go away, the support needs don't go away, the need for support in education and extracurricular activities and all of these things don't disappear. So I think there's a lot more we have to do with that. I'll talk very briefly about some of the things Labour's pledging to do, and hopefully some of it will come out in questions you've got later. But I think there's a more kind of fundamental thing about disability in Scotland, because of course people aren't disabled because of their medical diagnosis of their care needs. They're disabled by the society that we live in. And while Scotland, I think, is a lot more inclusive and accessible than a lot of other countries and has done a huge amount in recent years to become even more inclusive, for too many people this still isn't a very accessible country. And actually they are still faced with huge challenges and barriers in every walk of life. And I think there's a lot more that we need to do about that. Just some very specific things. Labour's pledged in this election that we want to use the powers of the Scottish Parliament a lot more, particularly around stopping a lot of the damaging cuts that are coming to our public services and to local government, and we'll do that through some tax policies which have recently been analysed and said would raise about 1.2 billion a year, and that's money that we can put into protecting frontline services for people. And secondly, we've talked about a care workers guarantee, so that the people who are providing the care have a guaranteed framework of wages and of banning 0 hours contracts, and of trying to bring to an end the scandal of 15-minute care visits, which I know a lot of people still get. And thirdly, I completely agree with Jamie, actually. The powers that are coming to Scotland about social security, I think we do need to stop using the phrase welfare reform. And actually, this is a safety net for people. That's what it was designed as, and that's what it should remain. And I think in Scotland, we've now got the powers where we can do something slightly different to create a system that's actually not based on penalising people, but actually based on giving people the support that they need to live fulfilling lives. And I'm conscious of time. Fourthly, we've announced today some plans for a new skills body in Scotland that will bring together the powers of the work programme, which are coming to Scotland, and the various other skills powers that the Scottish Government has at the moment, so that we can create one body that pulls together all the resources so people can get the help they need to go into work or training or whatever is suitable for them in their lives. So hopefully you can ask me a lot more questions about all that, but that's a bit of what Labour is pledging to do.
Michael, thank you very much. I'm already being quite lenient, so I will afford that to my left-hand side as well as our first two speakers. Robert, for the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Yes, thanks very much. Can I join with the other speakers in thanking Disability Agenda Scotland for putting on the hustings and for you being present today. Can I also make the observation that a good deal of what's been said already, and I guess what's going to be said in the future, are things which I agree with. I think there's a lot of commonality across the political parties here. Indeed, I think it's a strength where there can be that commonality that could cross through different governments and over a period of time for a very long-term programme. A word about myself, first of all. As been mentioned, I was an MSP previously, and I'd like to give a flavour of my interest there, because I was chair of the cross-party group on human rights, chair of the cross-party group on visual impairment, and also chair of the cross-party group on children. And I think these are kind of the core things I've been interested in, and some of the surrounding things that go with that. And disability issues, clearly, I think, cross a number of those agendas and are highly relevant to the sort of things I've been talking about. Now, sometimes forgotten in all the furore about hustings and political party differences, that when you have particular meetings for pensioners, for care leavers, for disabled people, that actually all these particular groups have got many of the same issues in common. That the rest of the population have got. They're interested in health, they're interested in education, they're interested in opportunities for their children and care for their old people, they're interested in the economy and all of that sort of stuff as well. The difference perhaps is that disabled people, if there's unemployment, there's probably more of it amongst disabled people. If there are educational barriers, there's more of it amongst disabled people. People who have got disablements also probably use the NHS more often. So the public services are more significant in the lives, I think, of disabled people than they are perhaps amongst the population in general terms. Now, what I want to say really about that is that we need to have a government that's focused on these sort of things, on public services and the quality of them, that can make a difference for people's individual lives. And we're talking, for example, in education about a very focused educational investment, a penny on the Scottish rate of income tax, particularly for education, schools, early years and colleges, providing just around £500 million of investment, quite a lot of money in these terms, to make up for many of the cutbacks we've seen in the recent years under the current government, and also to provide a transformational investment for many people as well. I took forward, when I was chair of the Education Committee of the Parliament, the additional support for the Learning Act that went through the Parliament at that time has been built on subsequently as well. And of course, a lot of these things have to have the resource to go with them. And what we're seeing at the moment is a bit of salami slicing of teachers, of support staff, of people of that sort in the educational system. We've got to be able to restore, I think, the focus that comes on these kind of things. Same with the health service. Health service, I think, needs to have a bit of a focus on the GP recruitment crisis, on mental health in particular has been talked about. Mental health is core to so many things and doesn't have an equality within the service that it perhaps ought to have, despite the changes that have been made. And I think in summary, the core liberal value that I want to put across in this regard, we want everyone to achieve their potential. We want to tackle the social economic injustices that afflict so many people with disablements. And in all the furore, I think, about constitutional change, now about the misconceived referendum on Europe, politicians sometimes lose track of the core point, the bread and butter issues, which actually make a difference to so many people. We'll deal, obviously, with some of the disabled issues in particular later on, but I wanted to lay out, if you like, a general overview of the sort of approach that we take as Liberal Democrats to the issues that face so many people. Thank you very much indeed.
Robert, thank you very much. I'm going to move swiftly on and ask Graham to address us from the Scottish Conservatives.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Graham Brooks. What I'd like to open by saying it's fantastic to be here, and obviously thank you for the invitation. Let me answer Bill's question. Bill's question was, what are we going to do? What's the future tense of this election that's coming forward and the 5 years of the next Scottish Parliament? Well, what motivates me, as you've heard earlier on in my introduction, that I used to work for a Christian charity and been involved in full-time Christian work for 28 years. And you know, the widows and the orphans is a phrase that's often used within biblical context if you read scripture, if you're involved in a Christian church. And Mark's gospel is really clear about the people who need the support most, or how we measure and how we should organise our society. The people who are left alone, the widows, the orphans, the people who can't cope for themselves. And in today's culture, the people who have a disability. Now, people who have disabilities have great abilities, and sometimes they've got better abilities if we look beyond their disability. So I would love to be the person who helps look beyond the disability to find abilities. College places. Over the last 5 years, we've devastated. The Scottish Government have devastated the college places that we have here in Scotland, and that has had a massive effect on those people who need college places part-time, people who have got disabilities. So we would like to make a big investment to ensure that we reverse those. Our friends in the panel have suggested that they don't like the phrase of welfare, but the challenge is that social and healthcare is coming together. And I think that's really important. That's a positive thing that's happening in Scotland. But I'd like to go straight further. And can we bring some disabled welfare benefits into that as well? What would it look like if the welfare wasn't centralised in Edinburgh, but it came to the local authorities where we're already putting together the social care and the welfare, and the health for disability people? Family Crisis Fund, we want to put £10 million into our Family Crisis Fund because we believe that people with mental health problems, mental health challenges need support. And we're going to raise that £10 million by cutting what the current government have got in place called a named person or a state guardian up to the age 18. So that's how we'll fund that policy. We have got further policies that I would like to bring to your attention. We don't think that a strategy for mental health over 10 years is good enough. Society moves much faster than 10 years. Think about technology. Think about what we've got here in the room, tweeting, YouTubing. Things move fast. We want a 4-year strategy. And every 4 years, we get the stakeholders together, the Scottish Government, and all the class third sector organisations that we have in Scotland, so we can come together and deliver a 4-year strategy to help those people that need the best help. We've got policies, we've got plans, and with your support, we'll implement them. Thank you.
Graham, thank you. I'm now moving on to Zara from Scottish Greens.
Hello, it's really good to be here. I'm Zara Kitson and I'm Scottish Greens candidate for Glasgow region. Particularly welcome to everybody that's managed to make it along today, because I'm sure for many of you it wasn't an easy journey, because just getting on a bus to get here or navigating public transport or public buildings or public services is a huge issue for many disabled people. I first got involved with politics because I recognised that I didn't see myself reflected in politics. I didn't see the young women's voices. I grew up in quite a deprived community in ex-mining village, and I didn't see working class or people that had been brought up in poverty. I didn't see my voice or our voices reflected in politics. And I was motivated to change that. It's really good that we're having this event so that your voices are heard, but I think where we really need to push to make real change is we have to have disabled people's voices actually represented in politics. And that's why I'm really glad that Scottish Greens have signed up to the 1 in 5 campaign to remove those barriers to being represented in our decision-making structures. Because when disabled people's voices are represented, that's when we make better decisions. If we had our transport systems and our public buildings and our public services designed in consultation and with disabled people actually part of those decisions, I'm sure that we wouldn't be facing an issue where we have buildings or public services that can't be accessed by people. Because as we've already recognised today, it's not people with disabilities that are disabled, it is our society, our systems and our structures actually that don't enable you to be able because there's barriers in place. So for me, I think that's a really important starting point with all of this. And if we're going to be visionary about the kind of Scotland we want to have, I think that that needs to be a key part of it, is we need to start taking people's voices seriously and look at how we genuinely include disabled people and their experiences and voices in our decision making at local level and at Parliament level and across all of our public services. That's a really important one for me because I think it will make a huge, huge difference to people's lives. I think it's also important to recognise that as disabled people, that's only one part of your identity. Disabled people are also multiply discriminated in other ways. So if you're a disabled woman, again, you're facing discrimination as a woman because that's a wider discrimination that exists in our society. The same if you're a disabled person that's from an ethnic minority, is from an ethnic minority origin. Again, you will face multiple discriminations, and we need to recognise that these multiple diverse identities also have an impact on how you experience our services, and that's important that we bring this into how we make change. Now, for Scottish Greens, we've got some key commitments. I'm going to try and make it short because I'm sure your ears are burning and you're just actually wanting to get your own questions in. But for us, one of the key important parts of this election is we have to push for a more equal Scotland, because as we've already heard and we recognise, inequality is having a negative impact on all of us and on our communities. The gap between the richest in our society and the poorest is actually growing, and that is causing huge misery in people's lives and in our communities. So for Scottish Greens, we've put forward serious progressive tax proposals so that those that have the broadest shoulders and earn the most, because let's not forget that people make money from the work that we all contribute to as well, so they will pay more, and people that earn less will pay less. So tax is about raising money but also distributing it more equally. We want to push to have a 50% increase in the carers allowance to make sure that people have a livable income who are providing care as well. And in terms of social security, we want a commission on social security, and we want disabled people's voices in there so that going forward, any social security policies that Scottish Parliament puts forward are based on human rights, dignity and respect, and we want those principles to be embedded in any policies that go forward in Holyrood.
Thank you very much. Well, there you have it, 5 party perspectives on the issues that are going to be front of mind for them in the coming period. I said at the beginning we had sort of themes that we were going to try and structure some of the conversation around. Across the panel there we heard quite a bit and some divergence of opinion around the aspects of social security, which seems to be a preferred term of use across the panel. I have one question that I'm going to feed in, which I'd like the panel to reflect on first of all. But as I do that, I'd like to open it up on social security, welfare, whatever term you want to use it. And let's gather up 2 or 3 questions that might be burning questions on that particular subject and see if I can get the panel to reflect across the whole piece. The question I have to start us off was submitted in advance, and it is this. Do you think the recent welfare cuts to the disabled are fair and just? If you were in power, how would you improve the disability benefit system? So there's an overarching question. I've got 1 hand, I've got 2 hands. I'll take these questions first. Gentleman in the middle of the room. Thank you. There's a mic making its way to you.
Hi there, my name's Ken Reid. I'm from RNIB Scotland, and my question refers to the future powers that are coming the way of the Scottish Parliament have been sort of determined under this principle of no detriment. I'd like to understand what the parties understand no detriment to mean when it's applied to the social security welfare system for disabled people.
Thank you. And a gentleman who was to my right under the same heading.
Hi, my name's Joe Neeson. I'm the acting chair for the Family Forum for Sense. My question is really relating to care charges. When DLA was set up and now it's going to be PIP, it was to enhance somebody with disability in their lifestyle. Is there any party here brave enough to abolish the care charges, this unfair stealth on people with disabilities?
Great. Let's take those together, and there's more hands. I'll come to you in a second, sir, if I can. Let's. You've got a question. A big question. Right. Okay. Let's have it. Yeah.
My question to you, right, is I feel strongly for the Conservatives here about how the mess we're in at the moment with the financial problem and how much the world has got to the dogs at the moment. And see, Pip, I don't like that. I think the DLA and benefits should stay as they are. And see, for the future, I think my vote would be going with SNP because they know what it's like to be disabilited. Because see, my disability, because of the Conservatives now, I am now not, because my money is going down. And you know why that is? Because the Conservatives are cutting everything, and that's not fair. And I'll tell you what else isn't fair. Jobs being advanced to robotics and all that. People need jobs as well.
Thank you very much for that, sir. I'm going to take those together, and I'll come back to you if I might. There'll be plenty more on this. So 3 or 4 questions there around current system, fairness, and is it just, and where can improvement be made? Very specific question there on the principle of no detriment. And then we had a couple of specifics around care charges and PIP and the financial challenges of people going through that system. I'm going to try and bring people in at different times, but I'm going to go to Scottish Labour first on this. And Michael, can you reflect on those points you've heard?
Yes, those are good questions. I mean, I said in my introductory remarks that one of the things we're saying in this election is that we want to use the new powers that are coming to the Scottish Parliament a lot more. So we have the powers in Scotland coming over a large part of the welfare budget, over the social security budget, so we can make some different choices there. So on the care charges point, first of all, Labour has said that we would work to abolish care charges, and we do that in a number of different ways, but one of them is just raising the additional revenue that we've set out, which is a penny more in income tax than what George Osborne's proposing. That's the power we have in Scotland to be able to do that. And raising the top rate of income tax on those that earn over 150,000. So if you earn quite a lot to begin with, you could pay a little bit more tax. And that would raise, it was kind of independently analysed last week, it would raise 1.2 billion. And we could put that into stopping some of the cuts that are happening, but also investing in different ways so we can make some different choices that the government hasn't made at the moment. One of the things that I think a number of parties on here were quite proud to do was to have free personal care for the elderly in in the last Labour Liberal Democrat government in Scotland, and the SNP have kept that, and we should be working to make sure that everybody who has care needs has their care needs met in the best way that we can. I mean, underpinning all of our kind of policies on this is the idea that the social security system should be about treating people as people with dignity and with respect, so that actually you get the care that you need. You don't have to fight for it. You don't have to beg for it. You don't have to answer some of the unbelievably demeaning questions that you get in some of these assessments. I've met people who have been asked questions like, can you get something out of the top shelf of your cupboard? Can you walk to the bus stop? As if that defines whether you should or shouldn't get the support that you need. In Scotland, we've now got a choice where we could build a fairer system, and I think we probably have a bit of consensus here about how we can do that, and actually make sure that disabled people get the support that they need to live fulfilling lives. The no detriment principle is, I think, an interesting one, because, and it ties in a bit with your question about the Conservatives, because even the Conservatives' own welfare secretary has said that these cuts are indefensible and are unfair. So when the guy who has wrought so much misery on a lot of the people in this room and across the whole of the UK resigns because he can't stomach what his government's doing anymore, then I think we get a pretty good indication actually of just how far the UK government has actually gone on some of these changes. We've got a choice now in Scotland to do things differently. I think we need to grasp it and build a plan for a fairer way to do these things.
Michael, thank you. I'm going to bring in Graham
Thank you
next.
very
There were some specific points there for your party which were raised through the questioning.
Well, both Jamie and our friend who raised the questions have got specific points, so it's really good they get an opportunity to answer. Firstly, I would say that long-term benefit welfare reform is the objective. The objective isn't cuts. The objective is long-term benefit welfare reform so that we have a better system of welfare for those people who need it. And one of the major challenges that we have for that is to ensure we have an economy that can afford to pay for that welfare reform and pay for the welfare benefits, the disabled benefits that we require. So a strong economy is the way forward. Obviously, Jamie has quite rightly said that Ian Duncan-Smith has obviously resigned his post. But I was with Ian Duncan-Smith and Bob Holman up in Easterhouse a good number of years ago when Ian Duncan-Smith was just about to get the position. And his objective was to ensure that people who were on welfare, people who at the moment or at that time weren't able to go out to work, that would change. The people who could work would be given the support and the encouragement and the ability. And we've done that. We have had a massive increase in a number of people who are able to go out to work. We've seen other countries through this very difficult financial times where unemployment has rocketed, and we have bucked that trend. So although we can take a quick shot, Jamie, at the Scottish Conservatives, what we have an ability to actually ensure that people can make the best of the world, make the best of their life, and move into employment. On the PIP, you're right, we have had the PIP announcement at the budget, and that's called democracy. We've got MPs within Westminster of all colours, all parties, including Conservatives, who felt it wasn't the right way forward, and that didn't even get before the House. So I'm not too sure how you would like the world to be run. I'm happy that we have a central democracy in Westminster and in Edinburgh, and I'm glad that we have that democracy and not people on the streets shouting, or people, even worse, people on the streets with guns. So the objective of the welfare reform is to make it better, is not to make cuts. And in the journey we're going with that, we have to ensure that people who can work can take up that opportunity, not just for a financial cut, but for their well-being, for their sense of contribution to society, for the sense of being part of the society that we have. There's a few people maybe looking frowning at me, but there's so many people who would much rather go out and do the day's work than lie in their bed and take a cheque. So that's the objective that we want to go. Absolutely. We have done more than any other government, historical, and I bet any more government in the future, to ensure that people who businesses who need to pay taxes have paid taxes. We've brought in more legislation to close loopholes, and there's more that's going to come.
I'm going to move us on, and there will be time. Can I ask just for commentary and reflecting on what you hear from the panel? If we can do it through the chair, it's going to make the process better, I think, for everybody this afternoon. So can you hang on to that just for a second, please? Thank you. I want to bring in the next candidate. Zara, you talked about a commission around social security. Maybe you could elaborate on that and address some of the specific points that were raised there.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the specific points in the question about are the cuts, is welfare reform fair and just, I think it's absolutely unfair, it's absolutely unjust, and it's nothing short of an attack on disabled people. And I think for the Conservative Party to dress it up as anything other than that is actually really disrespectful. I think the guy at the back makes a very good point about why are we in a position where actually we're dressing this up as welfare reform and cuts, yet we still have big businesses that are not paying tax, that are making money from people in this country, and we have growing inequality. That's not going away. So, and that is the key challenge actually that I think we need to be addressing with the Scottish Parliament, with the powers that we will have. We will obviously, most of us will agree that we want to prevent Conservative cuts and a Conservative agenda, but I think it's important to focus on what we can also do in this period of Parliament. So for the Scottish Green Party, we want to, as I said, a commission on social security, and for that I think what's what we've recognised is that what's happened to our social security system is it's been very misguided because of what's happening in Westminster, and we now have a system that's not about a safety net, it's not about protecting people, it's not about security, and it is a race to the bottom, really, and it's not humane. There's no dignity or respect in there, and we have to make sure that whatever the Scottish Parliament brings in, that we have those principles core to whatever it is that we create in our Parliament. So that's where our idea comes for the Commission on Social Security, and it's as part of it we want the commissioners to be people that are actually in receipt of benefits and social security, so that their voices are the ones that are shaping the principles that will take forward policies in the Scottish Parliament. And I think that's really important and is really key, because as we know that the collective experiences in the room are the most powerful, because it's your lived experience that enables everyone to be more enlightened in terms of the best way forward. So for us that's a key part of that, and I'm sure that we will get actually a lot of cross-party support on that commission, because everyone recognises that it's important that kind of is a staple going forward.
Let's test that cross-party consensus then. Can I ask Jamie Hepburn to come in on this?
Yeah, let me first of all take up Joe's point about the issue about care charges. Can I say, Joe, there is some work already underway between the Scottish Government and COSLA to try and look at this particular area. I think the fundamental point you were making was about the purpose of certain payments, so they should be about additionality. And I would agree very much with that sense. So we look at, for example, I referred to it earlier with the Independent Living Fund. The purpose of those payments should be about an additionality for the recipient, and if there was any evidence emerging that through the process of assessment for liability for care charges or other forms of support, these things have been taken into account, and that's something we need to look at and reflect on, and see if we needed to be sending out a stronger message to those undertaking that process. Let me bring it back to the first principles, because I think the question that you posed that had come in, I think via Twitter, you said, Billy, about the changes to disability benefit. Are they just? Well, I think the young man whose name I didn't catch, unfortunately, who spoke very eloquently, summed up very clearly that no, they are not just. And Graham said a number of things. I think the first thing I should point out, Graham, is I'm Jamie, that's Michael.
Oh,
so
sorry.
I've not said anything thus far. People on the streets with guns was a really interesting place to end up. I'm not quite sure how we got there, but I think you, unfortunately, Graham, were really starting to, because one of the things we've been asked to sign up to, the Disability Agenda Scotland pledge about stigmatisation, incidentally a pledge I've been very happy to sign up to. I think we need to be very careful about the language we deploy, and I think you came very close, unfortunately came very close to suggesting that everyone who's going through the social security system is somehow a layabout, not interested in working, just wants to stay in bed and get a check at the end of the week. I think that's more or less.
I think you're saying that, not me.
Well, I might be paraphrasing slightly what he said, but I think that's more or less what he said. That is, of course, to fundamentally misunderstand that most people who are going through the social security system are in fact already in work. But to bring it back to the disability benefits, in particular, I think the change from DLA to PIP has been an unmitigated disaster. And I thought it was really interesting to hear Graham say that the purpose of this whole process of welfare reform, that's the only time I'm going to try and use the term welfare, but using the language that has been implemented by the UK government, the purpose is reform and not cuts. Well, that's not the reality on the ground. We know that those who with a disability in receipt of payments are losing on average £1.2 thousand per household. So the fact that we're getting enhanced powers does allow us to do something different. My party has already announced that we will reverse the change to PIP. We'll revert back to DLA. We'll be doing other things, such as ensuring that carers allowance is paid at the same level as job seeker allowance. We'll continue with the Independent Living Scotland Fund. Indeed, we want to expand that and open it up to new recipients. It's been many years since there's been any new recipients to the Independent Living Fund. And let me finally finish with the point that Ken made, a really interesting point, one that has not actually occurred to me, because when we've been talking about no detriment, we've been talking about the powers over taxation and the overall Scottish block grant. But I think it's a really interesting perspective in terms of no detriment to those going through the social security system, and it is one I believe that should be the hallmark of a decent and fair social security system. We have already set out a pledge to establish a social security agency. There'll be a bill published in the first year of this next parliamentary session of the SNPs in government to create that social security administration, and its hallmark will be about empowering people and ensuring those going through the system, whether they have a disability or not, but particularly if they have a disability, their voice must be heard as part of that process. I know that that's not been the case with the current system. I think that's why it's unfair, and I think that does speak of detriment. That's something we need to move away from.
Jamie, thank you, and thanks for dealing with that point specifically. Roberts.
Yes, and one or two points I think have been raised out of that. And I do think it's worthwhile looking at the principles of what we're trying to do here in two respects. First of all, why are certain arrangements being devolved to the Scottish Parliament? Largely because they link well with other powers that the Scottish Parliament has got in terms of social work, in terms of health services, and obviously on the employability front in terms of the skills agenda and schools and colleges and all that sort of thing as well. So it's the linkage there that's important. What it doesn't do is provide any more money as such. There's the same envelope financially as what there was before. So the idea that somehow there's going to be a kind of magic time arrives because of the greater powers, I think we're going to be very careful about. What we can do is make the thing more flexible, more sensitive, and more person-centred than it has been in the past. And with regard to Graham's point about the changes proposed by the Conservative government on the disability front, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the issue really is not so much that democracy didn't work because of the outcry. It really is why on earth were these things being proposed in the first place by any government that actually wanted to be taken seriously on this particular issue. And it's very fortunate we had the power through the House of Lords and through other agencies to be able to stop it and to make the actual government think again about this particular matter. It's also probably quite helpful that George Osborne had some leadership agenda issues that lay behind it as well. The other aspect, though, was on the reform of the social security system itself, because there was actually at the beginning quite broad cross-party consensus that there needed to be changes in the way in which these things operated, you know, to get away from the kind of penalty against work and all of that sort of thing that was endemic to parts of the system, the complexities of the system, and so forth. And I think actually that there was quite a considerable sign-up, because remember it goes back to before the coalition government to the Labour government, you know, when these things sort of began. The issues really have been in the implementation of it, in terms again of the inability to get to grips with the assessment process properly. Because as has rightly been said already, what we should not have is a situation where people who are manifestly disabled, but there's no argument of their status, you know, should have to go through again all the routine, all the process, and all the unpleasant interventions that seem to go along with the assessment process. There are big issues about that kind of thing as well. Michael rightly talked about the introduction of free personal care by the Scottish Parliament. That was actually something on which, as Liberal Democrats, we take very considerable pride. But it was actually against the grain of what was happening more widely at that particular time. And I think there's considerable credit goes to the Parliament of those days, for that matter to the First Minister of those days as well, for having the courage to go forward in that particular respect. But now's the time to be able to both deal with some of the difficulties that have arisen with free personal care, because it has been a bit straining at the edges, if I can put it that way, for quite a lot of people, and to be able to extend it, in effect, to cover loads of disabled people as well. I think that's probably all I want to say in response to the questions there. The care issues, maybe worth saying just one thing on
Sure.
care, because I think there is actually an issue with carers as well as for the care system as well. And I think the carers allowance and the arrangements that go to support carers very much need to be reformed and modernised and increased. And that's an area, I think, of considerable importance to many people as well.
Thank you, Robert. I want to stick with this subject just for a few minutes longer. There was a lady who tried to get in the last round. I'm going to try and give people who have not had the chance to speak the opportunity. So there's a question here, and then there's a gentleman at the back.
Is he moving voting this month?
Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Voting this month? Yeah.
Voting next month, yes.
Yeah, people voting one.
Swindles is one, it's because it's a ballot, people with two votes.
Two votes.
Okay.
process.
Okay, well, we'll get some quick response to that in terms of the process of voting. That's a big issue for all of us, the accessibility of the process, understanding one vote and two votes, and what gets you to the polling station in a safe way with the information you need. So let's deal with the accessibility of the system, and I'll take this other question, thanks.
Well, this is actually kind of directed at a Tory, Tory man or person, whatever he wants to call himself. Graham. Well, you know what, mate? You really got my dander up with that.
Okay.
You're saying up there about folk at Easter House and folk being layabouts and not trying to get jobs. Well, you know what, mate? You're wrong with that. You really are wrong with it, because you try being a person with a learning disability and you go out there and try and get a job. It's really hard if you don't have a learning disability. It's 10 times as hard if you do. It's even worse if you've got dyslexia or something like that, and you're sitting up there slating those guys. That's not right.
Okay.
Definitely not right.
Thanks. I'll come back to this, because I think we're coming on to that underlying, I think, the comment there was the toughness around the situation for this constituency on work, and I'm going to move on to the whole employment agenda just in a minute or two. There's another hand here. We're still with social security. Thank you.
Sorry, what it was you were talking about the DLA, and you were also talking about the carers allowance. Now, I've been a carer for 28 years, and I've got 28 years experience and very qualified. Now, these cuts that are forecast is absolutely discriminating disabled people, because one, the staffing and the funding to all these organisations is being really, it's going to destroy us, and it's going to destroy these people's lives. They're going to be discriminated yet again, as if they face discrimination every day of their life. We've got people in care organisations who don't see that they can even go to a cinema. You can go to a cinema any day of the week. These people have got to depend on staff to take them anywhere, even to get fresh air, and it really galls me. I'm all for the government strategy for the keys to life, and that's the way I would like to be able to commit my career. But these cuts are going to cause, I don't know what's going to happen to these people.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Jamie Hepburn first, as a minister in the government that's been sitting, obviously, for the last period of time. There was a few things there. Maybe if you could finish, Jamie, on just the accessibility of the process for the disabled constituency, but cuts to services, cuts in the movement from things like DLA to other benefits.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to come on to employability, and I know we met at Cumbernauld. I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, but... Sorry? John, it's good to see you again. Don't worry, Graham got all our dander up with his comments, so you don't need to feel alone in that regard. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, I'm afraid.
My name's Liz.
Liz, thank you for your question, Liz. You will hopefully be aware of the changes that we brought forward in terms of trying to better support carers. I would recognise that for too long we've not done enough to support unpaid carers in Scotland. We have taken forward the Carers Act, which will introduce a number of measures, not least that in each local authority area there must now be a statutory provided carer information service. Every carer in Scotland now be entitled to go through either an adult care support plan or a young carer statement in the case of them being under 18. And I think that will improve support for those who are a carer, and in turn for those they provide care for. I'm not going to pretend that there are challenges for many organisations out there. What I can tell you is that we as an administration have been absolutely committed to doing what we can to better support carers, continue to provide care for their loved ones. And in terms of, it was interesting to hear you talk about the support for the organisations out there. So through Carers Information Strategy funding, we're providing £4.75 million across Scotland for such funding this year, which I've been able to go out and visit and see firsthand a tremendous range of innovative services that are provided across the country. There's £3 million, the exact same as we provided last year, for short breaks funding, some of which can be used for the very type of short break for going to the cinema and the rest of it that you were talking about. So I'm not suggesting that it's not difficult. I recognise that, but we're going to do what we can to try and better respond. In terms of accessibility to the system, I recognise at times it can seem somewhat complicated. Actually, hopefully it isn't as difficult as it might appear at first glance. At this election, you've got 2 votes, and you just go along and you put a cross in the box for the candidate you want for your area and for the party you want in the region as well. But I think when I came in, I noticed there was some documentation available at the back of the hall, not provided by me. I'm not taking any credit for it, but by Disability Agenda Scotland. I think they provided some documentation which explains the system, so that might help people.
Okay, great. I'm going to bring in Robert and then the other panel member just in a second, but I want to capture 2 questions as we're doing that, just to add and keep building this as we're going. There's a young gentleman in the front here, and there's a gentleman next to the lady who spoke before, Liz. Thank you.
Hello, I would like to first introduce myself because up there it says I'm a new speaker. My name is Dominic Howitson, and I am a person who lives at a care home in Perth. I have a disability which allows me very much pain, and I often don't get to go out, and I run into situations and problems sometimes when I do go out. So occasionally I get my advocate involved, and due to my advocate becoming involved, I have had the freedom of speech and the ability to actually communicate with the services manager in a better way than I ever have done. However, something that she said to me in our last meeting concerned me. There's an issue with funding for the independent advocacy in Perth, where they only support those up to 25. However, you know, they said to me we used to support people over the age of 25, and we used to help those who were disabled across the board, but now we can't due to funding cuts. How do you think that makes me feel, and how do you think you will support me in that and all the other people who have advocates to allow the freedom of speech that they deserve under the Human Rights Act?
Great question, Dominic. Advocacy is a real hot topic, so we'll ask that to my left just shortly, and I'll also bring in. Sir.
What do you think independent from what do you think about independent for Scotland? If we get independent, who's going to pay the disabled people? Cuts.
So the cuts agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Right, Robert. Okay, thank you.
Yes, quite a few questions there. I think Jamie's maybe touched on the voting thing. Maybe deal with that first.
Sure.
There are 2 votes for the Scottish elections, as you know. They're both X, one for the local constituency, Cathcart or Kelvin or whatever it happens to be, which is on the same system as you know for the Westminster elections, and one is for the more proportional party list system, which is the Scottish Liberal Democrats in our instance, or the other parties on what's called the Glasgow regional ballot in terms of Glasgow. Now, they both elect a different lot of MSPs. The end result ought to be proportional, but you can use a little bit of tactics sometimes about the best way to go on these things. So that's the voting system, as far as that's concerned. Now, there was talk, I think it was Liz that talked about the question of carers. I think she was actually talking about community transport and things of that kind, amongst others, weren't you? The things that support disabled people going to groups and carers, things of that kind. Now, I've had some involvement both in Glasgow when they reviewed, I think is probably the most neutral word I can have, about community transport a few years ago, and then more recently in South Lanarkshire, where they looked at the withdrawal of the transport that takes wheelchair users and other people to evening groups of one sort or another. Now, fortunately, we were able to stop them doing that at that point. Some money was found to deal with it, but it shows the sort of pressures that the local authorities are under because of the council tax freeze and the general financial pressures that go along those lines. Now, it seems to me that although these are non-statutory services, and therefore they're easy to get at, they're actually quite crucial if we're going to be able to support disabled people, people with all sorts of disablements in going about their ordinary business and taking part in society. So I think they should have a very high priority in doing that. We've actually got to look at the funding of local authorities in that way, if I can say that in general terms. As far as the Perth issue is concerned, is it Donald? Dominic raised. I don't know, that's a local issue in the immediate sense. I imagine that the group is funded from the local authority or other bodies in that connection, so it's a local issue to that degree. But as a general matter, advocacy, I think, is hugely important. It doesn't sound as if you need advocacy to express. You did so extremely well there in that way, but advocacy is extremely important because it does give a voice, as you rightly touch on, to a whole lot of people who perhaps otherwise have difficulty in engaging with services. And however we do it, I think we're going to make sure that the advocacy services and other support groups, for that matter, which support people, younger people and older people, are adequately financed to do the business. Now, we have had a difficult period of financial stress for the last period. We're moving, hopefully, into a slightly better period, but hopefully we ought to be able to deal with these things in a much more adequate way than we have in the past. I think there should be perhaps some degree of cross-party agreement about that.
Thank you. Zara?
So on Dominic's question, I think advocacy is really important for many, many people, including disabled people. This morning I met with a group of care experienced young people, and very much they were saying that one of the main issues for them is about autonomy over voice and control of your own life. And there's lots of commonalities here, and actually advocacy is often, it's not seen as a priority service because it's seen as a nice add-on, but we know that the value that it actually brings to enable you to actually connect to the services to make your life better is hugely important. So I think we need to see more priority on those services and not for it just to see an add-on. Now there's a challenge in that because we are in a period of cuts where anything that's not seen as what we call statutory is much more difficult to fund. So I think there's a wider issue here, and I'm going to connect it back to the women's point at the back as well about the care services, because we are in a period where local authorities are going to be enforcing cuts on local services. And often our care services, so care for anybody, is often deprioritised, partly because I think there's an issue here that also links to gender inequality, because care is traditional women's work, so it's seen as undervalued and underpaid. Or often unpaid, and we want to progress to a society where actually caring work is seen as core and central to our everyday lives, because surely there's not any job that we can do that's more valuable than caring for our children, our elderly, our disabled people and people that need it, and it's something that touches every single one of our lives. So for the Scottish Greens, we've got some key priorities around carers to try and go some way to transforming the way the care sector works, both in terms of unpaid care and paid care. So for unpaid care, we want to increase the carers allowance by 50%, so that goes up to £93.15 per week. Still not great.
Sorry, Zara, the carers allowance actually comes off the person who is being cared for. It comes off their DLA, because I've personal experience with that with my own mother, and I was told if I was to look after my mum, that amount of money would come off my mother's money. Now, that's what I was told.
So it comes.
Do you know the DLA?
Yeah, the wider package.
Well, let's carry on and see if there are other experiences around carers allowance in response to that. Zara, keep going.
Yeah, so, and I think also for us as well, we also just pushing for more of a package of care in terms of benefits, but also for paid carers, people in the care sector, to get a living wage plus of at least £9 an hour, because we have a devaluing of the care sector where it means that people aren't getting the care they need because people are they're unskilled, or they're not actually people who are providing care are also living in poverty and are not having a good quality of life themselves. So we need to address these in both of those points by improving the wage that carers get that are doing the work, and also improving the unpaid carers allowance.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm going to bring in Michael, and then we'll go to Graham. Then I'm going to move us on to a new section around employment and employability. So if you can be thinking maybe about some questions around that. Michael.
Well, John, first of all, I suspect I don't need to say very much other than to say I agree with you, and hopefully we can move on from those comments. On the question about kind of flexibility of care and support that you get, I think I know a lot of, they're called unpaid carers. In some ways, I think people like yourself don't like that label, actually, because you're just a wife or a mother or not just, but, I think that's generally where a lot of people don't think of themselves as carers, and yet they're doing the job fantastically well. But generally what we need to do is give you a little bit of support so that you can carry on doing what you're doing. And if we don't do that, we risk the cost of having paid carers to do all the work that unpaid carers do. We just couldn't afford as a country, so we have to provide the support that you need. I mean, the accessibility of care packages, I think, is another one for me, because I know a number of people who, young people in particular, who get their 2 or 3 visits a day, and the first one's 9 o'clock in the morning, and the last one's maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and you've got a 20-year-old being put to bed at 9 o'clock at night because that's the only 20 minutes they can get a care visit, which basically just stops them having any social life that they might have been able to have. So we need to look at the kind of flexibility of the care we're providing so that people get the best kind of standard of care they can get. And time for that as well, because care isn't a come in, 10-minute appointment and out the door again. There's a lot more to actually being a carer. And people who do it as a job want to spend that time doing it. They want to build up a relationship. They want to put caring in the real definition of what caring is. So one of the things about our carers guarantee that the Labour Party is proposing is that there'll be a living wage for everyone, which is a real living wage, not the George Osborne living wage, but one crucially for carers that includes time to travel to jobs and the travel costs as well, because a lot of carers don't get that. And trying to put to an end the 15-minute care visits so people can have a real quality of care. Dominic, I think Zara's point was quite well made earlier on about actually this is a useful discussion maybe for you to listen to us, but I suspect what would be a lot more useful was if we were listening to you. And I think you made the point excellently there, actually, that I think you'd be a very good person for Zara's commission if we get that set up. But it's another example of these relatively small amounts of money, because it's obviously really critical to you to get that advocacy. But in the overall spending envelope of governments and councils, it's a relatively small amount, and yet without it, it makes your quality of life so much less. So we do need to look at these, and generally it's the cuts in local government that affect things like that, because they give these relatively modest grants that actually keep organisations going, or that give the core funding so that the organisation can find project funding from other places like the lottery or whatever. But if we take that funding away, organisations find it incredibly difficult to cope. So the other major thing from the Labour Party is that we'll reverse those cuts to local government with a penny on income tax that provides that money to make sure services that you rely on and that other people rely on are fully funded.
Michael, thank you. I'm about to do a sweep for some more questions, but I want to bring in Graham briefly if you want to address any points you've heard
obviously
there.
there's a lot of things we agree on, so Dominic, everything's been said, I agree, and obviously I don't want to add because we've just got 7 minutes left, but fantastic advocate you are yourself. Zara, what carers needs is the support and the funding, and I couldn't agree more. There's nothing that I want to add to the carer situation. But what I would like to suggest and look at is some of the transport issues that are required for carers and for people with disabilities. There's a big issues regarding that. We've touched on buses. Robert, I think, touched on buses, and quite rightly so. There's good things to be done. But I'm really concerned, and we would like to review why the companies who get train contracts, why they're insisting 4 hours somewhere before you can actually have to book in advance for a disabled person to get on the train. Someone asked for 24 hours notice. I don't believe either of those are acceptable. Why can't somebody, maybe wheelchair bound, maybe disabled, turn up just like any able-bodied person can and have the service available at the train station at the side so that they can actually move on? So we're going to look at that to ensure that if we're actually giving contracts to companies to run our railway systems, that obviously we've got a positive sense for that. And I've got to take just the last minute. So at the back, I'm not going to obviously discuss my disabilities. Afterwards, I will, because I want my microphone in front of me, but I couldn't disagree with you more. When I was made unemployed, I had to lie in my bed because I didn't have the strength to get out. When I was unemployed, my mental health went down because I didn't have the ability to get out. And what I got was the support and the energy from other people, from other agencies who gave me the strength to get up out of my bed, to overcome my disabilities and to get back into the employment circle. That's what I was saying. So let's not misquote me, yourself or Jamie. What I'm talking about, people who are struggling to get out of their beds. We want to support them through the system so they can, not because they choose to lie in bed, but because they're having a hard time, and that's the option that sometimes is the easy option.
Graham, thank you. Okay, can we take some questions? We've got some outstanding issues. We talked about employment. I said I would come back to you, sir. So also things like that came out of the survey, discrimination and stigma issues. I was reading today, hate crime against disabled people in the last 24 months, up 20% in Scotland. I know unemployment, again, something I was reading, people with sight loss, unemployment rates are going in the other direction instead of more people into work. But there's lots out there. I'm going to take 3 or 4 questions in a row here and then ask the panel to try and do a sweep because we're starting to get beat for time.
Well, again, my name's Joe. I worked in mental health for 25 years and I did work for Sam H, but I hope I don't see it as a plant. One of the things that I found in employment education, I worked in employment education, the clubhouse model. I don't expect everybody to understand that, but one of the things I found in my experience is that employers needed a lot of help. We had employers who were very keen to take on the service users that we had. People with the investors and people in a double tick. What are in the manifestos are you doing to help employers take more people on with disabilities? It's not as black and white as stigma. They did have some real issues in how to develop their own structure and taking people on. And has you ever thought of this? That doesn't sound right. But have you ever thought about working with more employers to make more people into work with disabilities?
Great. Employer support here. There's a gentleman down the front who hasn't spoken yet. It'd be good to get your question, sir. It's coming, the mic.
Why is this people talking?
Why are people allowed to park on pavements? It means wheelchair users have to go on the road to get by.
Is that Gerard?
This is Sassy.
That's Gerard's question, is it?
Oh,
Sassy.
Oh, sorry, Sassy. Beg your pardon. Thank you.
Behind him, Gerard's.
Oh, sorry, Gerard's behind, I think. I beg your pardon. There's another question, I think, behind you. Thank you. Was it Gerard here? Yep, there we are. Thank you. And I'm coming to you.
I was going to come back to my first point as well. My first point I was going to make is, will there be support us will there be support with the arts in the future in performance?
So support for the performing arts and arts, was that?
Ability to get involved.
Thank you, that's great. And our Chair of Arnaby Scotland behind for another question.
It's the ex-chair, actually.
Oh, beg your pardon, sorry, sir.
It's Ken Reid from RNIB Scotland.
Ken, sorry.
Just a mouthy one, that's all. It's regarding employment, and you quite rightly mentioned, Billy, that the unemployment rate for people who are blind and partially sighted is going in the wrong direction. It was in the wrong place to start with. 50% of disabled people are out of work. 70% of blind and partially sighted people of working age are out of work. That's about 15 times the national average for unemployment. And it's been stubbornly stuck at around about 70%. And at the last couple of years where general unemployment has been going down, our rate of unemployment has been going up. Everything that anybody has tried has failed to get more blind and partially sighted people into work. I'd love to know what the panel think that they're going to be able to do in a prosperous Scotland to get more blind and partially sighted people into work.
Thank you. And I'll take one more question if there's another one, and then we'll go to the panel again. Is that somebody in the middle row there too, Leila?
Sandra Wilson, RNIB Scotland.
Hello.
One of the issues that disabled people find in seeking employment is a service that is actually there to help them, and that is access to work. I'd like to ask the panel what their parties will do to improve the assessment process so that it's fair, fit for purpose and meaningful to the person, and delivered at a time that it gives the person the chance to have it sorted out before he or she starts work.
Thank you. Big subject, access to work. Okay, I'm going to... Yeah, there's one more question down the front here, and this will be probably the final sweep for questions, and then we'll get the panel to try and address as many as they can. Yes, sir.
Gym trainer, and I've got a brain injury, and I can't get respite. They've stopped a lot of respite places where I can't get to, and it's my wife that needs me to go. I say that
Yeah.
because she's my main carer, and they've now, the one I used to go to in Irvine is now closed.
Right.
That was from the Red Cross, and there's nowhere else I can go, and I need respite for the sake of my wife.
Okay, so respite, again, another big issue. There's one question here, and then I'm going to come back.
Hi.
You're going to have to pick a few here. Yes. We're just going to go slightly over, but those questions are super, so I'm carrying on.
Sorry, my name is Malaika. I'm a member of Action on Hearing Loss Scotland. First of all, Cara kind of mentioned the sort of three main issues that people tend to face, being the gender balance, so being a woman, being from an ethnic minority, and having disability. And I am all three. I know I'm very fortunate to be in employment, but I have found, and like Joe said, stigmatism from employers in terms of actually, if I were to put on a form that I am deaf, but they then think that I can't actually use a phone, despite the fact if you can just amplify a phone or have a loop system on one, that makes it really, really easy for me to use. But unfortunately, because a lot of employers think that deaf people cost a lot of money, and therefore, don't want to take them on, there is a lot of stigmatism there. And I would like to know what employers are going to do, and how you as a party are actually going to encourage employers to take on more people who have a sensory impairment, in my instance, deafness.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask the panel to do 2 minutes each. So you can pick a subject, or you can try and address as many of those as you can. The purpose of today was to get that voice in the room. We've heard it. There was a whole bunch of issues. We're getting beat for time. I'm going in the aspect of fairness. I'm just going to sweep again from my right to my left, if that's okay. So you get a wee bit more thinking time at this end than I'm going to give Jamie. There was a few questions there about employment, and I think it would be amiss not to hear about additional powers and what can be done. We're at a moment in time in Scotland with the ability to make changes we've not had before. So if we could get some focus on employment. There was things about parking on pavements, supporting the performing arts, access to work as part of that whole thing. Jamie, if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Right, 2 minutes. Thanks a lot, Billy. I'll try and get through as much as I can. In terms of the issue about parking pavements, that is a good question. It's one that we are aware of, and it's one that we're committed to addressing in this coming parliamentary term. Support for the performing arts. I wasn't quite sure of the context of the question. It seemed to be, would there be support for the performing arts generally? Yes, we will continue to fund Creative Scotland and the performing arts. I think all the other questions were... there was a question from Jim, was it? So the issue there is about the need for support for your wife who's your carer. So again, it goes back to the answer I gave earlier. The Carers Act that we've passed should significantly improve the support for carers like your wife. So she should now be entitled to an adult carer support plan, and if, as part of that package, part of that requirement is to give her respite, then there needs to be support put in place for you. The other general question, I think questions were more generally about employability, so I'll try and answer them as one. We are indeed getting enhanced powers. It does come with a challenge because we're getting significantly less resource than we were expecting, some 87% less resource, but the Scottish Government has already committed an additional £20 million to employability programmes. We are already working to try and make sure that we get this right. A lot of that will involve co-production with many of the organisations in this room, hearing what they think is particularly needed. But we've already set out broad principles by which we'll take forward our employability programme. And I think the most relevant two, and I'll quote them precisely, are to adopt a flexible, tailored, whole-person approach to provide personalised support, and also a system that's responsive to those with high needs. So that's the overarching principles by which we will take forward a system of employability programme that I think can better respond to those with additional needs, and I think we can do much more with the additional powers that we'll have in the coming parliamentary term.
Jamie, thank you. Michael.
Okay, 2 minutes. Thanks for all those questions. I think Joe's point I wanted to come back to mainly because it was about, yes, there will be some employers who discriminate against disabled people. There'll be some employers who have no intention whatsoever of ever having anyone in the workforce with a disability, and obviously there's legal recourse with that we should be using a lot more. But the other side of it, which I think I'm right in taking from you, Joe, is that there'll be some who are actually very willing but just don't quite know how to, or don't have the mechanisms to do it. And I think there is a lot more we could do with that. And one of the things that you're determined to knock that
Sorry,
over.
I beg your pardon.
One of the things that came up at the autism hustings we did as well, which was really interesting, was about a version of the charter mark, a version of the investors and people mark for employers or for shops or for cafes that were disabled friendly, or were in that context it was autism friendly. And there might be a way for us to think about, rather than kind of having a punitive way of going at this, actually we just support people and give them the help that they maybe need to do it. Because I think there are a lot of really good examples where employers have taken someone on in a kind of work experience role and have realised at the end of it actually they contribute a massive amount and just kept them on. And that doesn't happen often enough. But hopefully one of the things through the work programme is that we, like I was saying earlier about benefits generally, we get to a situation where the aim is to provide a service that actually helps people as opposed to just penalises them or tries to get money back out of them. And I think, when I was in Job Seekers Allowance, for example, I went to a work programme meeting where they, for 4 hours, taught me how to write a CV. Even though I told them at the outset I knew how to write a CV, that wasn't why I didn't have a job. And there's these things where we just need a personalised approach where actually it's what help do you need, how can we help you get it, and then I think that actually helps people get into work, which at the end of the day is better for all of us. Gerard, on arts funding, I know that you hold up the Southside Arts just for yourself with radio and singing and music and all those various things. So, but I think it goes back to the point I kind of made to Dominic as well about a lot of these organisations are very small organisations that do work, like Sunny Govern, that I know you've done a lot with. That just need a little bit of funding to keep going and to support people into doing things with them. But without that funding, it can be quite catastrophic for them as organisations. And very, very quickly, if I can, on Jim's point, because there's an interesting thing. One of the things that I do with the charity I support is its respite for the carers. But really interestingly, I think last year there was a report. Well, that's what I was going to say. There was a report out last year about the wider family of people with disabilities, and particularly siblings. And actually taking a person for some respite, which is good for you and for the person with a disability, actually helps everybody else in the family as well, and the siblings that are quite often kind of forgotten about and don't get the support that they need as well. So I think there's a lot more we could do with that as well.
Thank you. Robert.
Yes, just starting with the respite thing, I don't think we should lose track of the fact that there is really a bit of a crisis in respite, and there has been for a number of years. It is an issue we'll have to give more focus to, and I think it's a partnership ultimately between central government to kind of focus in, or perhaps provide a wee bit of extra seed corner funding. The local authorities will obviously have to deliver the goods in one form or another at the end of the day. I think it's a hugely important issue that takes a lot of pressure off, as you rightly say, a number of other directions too. On employment, I think that's actually a crucial point that Ken and Sandra in particular raised, and others as well, Joe, earlier on. I think there's two sides to the thing. I don't think there's any magic bullet. If you don't know the answer, I'm sure I don't. I don't think there's any magic bullet, but there's two sides to it. One is, I think, supporting, educating employers, identifying employers who are particularly larger ones who've got the facility to organise these things perhaps a wee bit better. Local authorities and public authorities amongst them, where quite often the figures aren't as high as they ought to be in terms of employment of people with disabilities of various kinds. Now, I think RNIB operate organisation arrangements like this. Certainly I remember the WISE group used to, and I think perhaps still does have a particular facility in place too, where they basically identify suitable employers, they engage with them and they work with them, and they support the people who are looking for employment into the employment as well, just to make sure there's not any teething troubles and problems that begin till people are settled in their job and able to move forward. And quite often it then settles down, and there's not really sort of long-term problems when people are able to understand the needs and to deal with them appropriately, which I think is often the issue. You talked very much about the deafness point. I mean, I think it's a good example of that, because quite obviously there's no obvious reason why there should be any detriment in you obtaining a particular job for that reason. but it maybe the employers didn't understand, maybe there's an issue of comprehension there. I don't honestly know, but it's obviously the kind of thing that we should be able to get over without, frankly, too much difficulty there. Disabled people are always going to have probably greater problems and challenges in all this than the average population for all sorts of reasons. The job, I think, of public policy is to try and reduce that as much as possible, put in place mechanisms and systems that make it actually work properly. Finally, just very briefly on performing arts, I think that's a very important issue, because performing arts and arts involvement has been, I think, a hugely important therapeutic thing for many people, empowerment thing too. And I think it's actually, again, it's one of these smallish things which doesn't need, Michael rightly spoken about that, doesn't need actually a huge amount of support, but does require that element of support if it's going to actually do the business for you.
Thank you, Robert. Graham?
Okay, let me just continue on employment then. So 8.1% of the population have the disability, and when it comes down to the ability to actually get employment through the modern pension scheme, it's only 0.4% that are people who are disabled. So there's quite clearly, it's been brought up on a number of occasions, quite clearly an issue with employing people who have disabilities. One of the great things that have been said, I agree with, I'm not going to repeat it. One of the great things I think we should do with people who are in employment and who have a disability is to show the workers, show the businesses and the employment the value of that, because there's good statistics out there that somebody who has a disability actually maybe works that a bit harder, maybe puts their shoulders to the wheel that bit more, because they value that job, because it's so hard to get. So actually there's value in employing people who actually have a disability that's actually greater. I'm not talking about positive discrimination here, but it's actually greater than employing somebody who maybe doesn't have a disability. Let me finally move on to the parking on pavements. To me, I agree, obviously the Scottish Government is bringing something in, and that's great, obviously, that we have a legal issue. But to me, it's a moral issue. Why do drivers think they have a moral right to put their car on the pavement? With all the money that's spent on the roads and these things. And so that's what I'd love to name and shame and get, social media. We've got it all over here today. Let's get photographs and let's get these people named and shamed, because it's completely out of order. Yes, we should have the Scottish Government bringing in penalties for people parking on pavements, but me and you, we should name and shame them, because it's morally unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. And Zara?
So I'll start with the parking on pavements. For me, I think there's a wider issue here, and it's that actually our public transport isn't working well enough, so people are over-reliant on their cars. If we invest in public transport and bring rail back into public ownership, if we re-regulate our buses and we have a much better investment in public transport, then we won't need people to be over-reliant on their cars, and we shouldn't get to a situation where people are having to park on the pavements. I think that's a bigger point, and we would like to see greater investment. And in terms of employability, again, I think if we look at the money that Scottish Government or local authorities spend, so we often issue work contracts to businesses, or we run public services, and if we did run our own buses and we had the rails back into public ownership, that's huge employment opportunities that actually government would have more control of and greater say of, and we can ensure then that when we're issuing these contracts, we have clauses in them that include inclusion of people and ensuring that we have greater representation of disabled people, and that includes people that are partially sighted or blind, it includes people that are deaf or hard of hearing. So I think that there are key things that actually is within Scottish Government's control, and we just have to be far bolder at calling that out and issuing clauses within, but obviously it has to come with support as well, so that we're ensuring that employers have support and have the right training and resources to enable them to do this. In terms of the work programme, again, I think it's really important that it's a not-for-profit, because often these programmes are delivered on the basis of making profit, and it means that the service that people get is not about the person, it's about a profit margin. So we have to make sure that, again, those services are delivered by third and public services, and I think that that's where we'll see a greater mix of services that are going to actually meet the needs of the people that we want to improve the lives of.
Sarah, thank you. Well, we gave that a real run-through. And there was tons of issues in the room, which I think were great issues. The questions were super. Thank you for putting them to the panel. I thought the panel attempted everything with an admirable honesty, and I think you've got a great sense of where they are. A lot of common ground, and this tends not to divide by party politics, and I think that's a good thing. So therefore, the level of respect and consensus that was around, I think, is reassuring. The campaigns for the organisations carry on. We've still to see 2 of the 5 manifestos for this general election, and we're not so very far away from it, so I'm sure we'll look forward to the parties on my right sorting that during the course of this week, so there may be even more detail for us to engage with in the coming days and weeks in the run-up to the election. Thank you for your attendance. Could you thank our panel? I thought they did a great job. So all that remains is sends a thank you to you for hosting it. As ever, a great venue, very accessible for everyone who was participating. A special thanks to the Disability Agenda policy team. When I say team, that is the individual members who come together and put these events together, gather up the issues and the voice that you've all given life to today. It doesn't happen by accident, so thank you to all 6 organisations and their policy teams. And a particular thank you to Leilaus, hiding behind the pillar there, who's pulled all that together as our new DAS resource across these matters. More to do, plenty to keep going at. Thank you for your attendance. Stay and have some refreshments at Sense. I know they've got something outside for us if you have time to do that. And safe home.